By the early 1930s, America was in the depths of the Great Depression. Unemployment soared to nearly 25%. Banks failed, wiping out the savings of millions. Families struggled to afford food, clothing, and shelter. For the lucky few who were able to retain their wealth, they did so in gold. As was the case with New York resident and attorney Frederick Barber Campbell, who had been routinely protecting his wealth in the form of gold bullion. However, on the morning of September 16, 1933, when Campbell attempted to withdraw his 27 bars of gold at Chase National Bank, his request was denied, his gold confiscated, and federal authorities were notified. The bank informed Mr. Campbell that he must surrender his gold, worth over $9 million adjusted for inflation, to the U.S. government in compliance with a newly enacted law, Executive Order 6102, the new law of the land issued by U.S. President Franklin D. Roosevelt, which effectively banned the holding of gold coin, gold bullion, and gold certificates within the continental United States. Campbell promptly contested the seizure, arguing that the actions were unconstitutional and the order violated his property rights. His case drew significant public attention, highlighting the overreach of the government's new executive powers. Despite his arguments, the court sided with the order, reinforcing the legality of the unprecedented gold embargo and the government's absolute right to seize the precious metal from its citizens. The case shocked and terrified many Americans of the time, as it demonstrated the federal government's willingness to enforce harsh monetary policies even against its most influential citizens. It underscored the seriousness of Roosevelt's agenda and the lengths to which the government would go to control a failing economy. This is the story of the United States ban on gold. Gold has long been a symbol of wealth, power, and beauty throughout human history, serving as a timeless standard of value and a source of fascination across cultures. Revered for thousands of years, gold was initially used for jewelry and religious artifacts, and later as a form of currency due to its rarity and durability. The US adopted the gold standard in 1879 to stabilize its currency and gain international trade credibility, linking the dollar's value directly to a specific amount of the precious metal. This system ensured that paper money could be exchanged, providing confidence in the US currency's value. However, the gold standard was eventually abandoned, as many believed it restricted economic growth and the government's ability to respond to financial crises. After a decade of speculative investments, uneven distribution of wealth, and overextended credit, the fragile US economy tumbled into the Great Depression of 1929. When the market crashed, it triggered a cascade of failures. Banks, already weakened by risky loans, began to collapse in droves, leading to a nationwide crisis of confidence. As the closures spread across the country, fear and panic quickly followed. Bank runs became an epidemic. People rushed to withdraw their money, converting their savings into gold, the last true safe haven. But such hoarding only worsened the crisis, draining the banks of their remaining reserves. President Franklin D. Roosevelt, famously known as FDR, inherited an American economy in freefall. Born into a wealthy family, Roosevelt began his political career as a New York State senator and later served as governor before being elected the 32nd President of the United States in 1932. FDR secured his victory by tapping into the public's widespread discontent with the Hoover administration's response to the Great Depression. By presenting a hopeful vision of change, he launched a series of aggressive reforms known as the New Deal. However, restoring confidence in the banking system required something more drastic. To stabilize the economy and restore confidence, President Roosevelt took an extraordinary step that would forever change the nation's relationship with gold. On April 5, 1933, Roosevelt issued Executive Order 6102, requiring all Americans to turn in their gold coins to the Federal Reserve in exchange for paper currency. The goal was to stop the hoarding of gold, increase the money supply, and give the government greater control over the economy. For many, the order was shocking. Gold had been seen as a stable and trusted store of value for centuries. Now citizens were being ordered to turn it into the government at the price of $20.67 per ounce, or face severe penalties, including fines of up to $10,000, $235,000 adjusted for inflation, or face imprisonment of up to 10 years. Small exceptions for industrial, artistic, and scientific uses of gold were allowed. Even though the majority of Americans complied with the order, many refused, leading to a few high-profile arrests and prosecutions. These cases shocked the public, as ordinary citizens faced heavy fines and imprisonment for holding on to their gold. The government used these cases as a warning to others, demonstrating the seriousness of the order. The impact was felt across the country. While many conformed, others resisted arrested, hoarding their gold in the hope of better days, despite the severe penalties for non-compliance. Some buried it in their backyards, hid it in walls, or even stashed it in secret compartments within their homes. Wealthy individuals and families, wary of the government's demands, devised sophisticated methods to send their gold overseas to Swiss banks, while others stored it in hidden vaults within their estates. Years later, many of these hidden gold stashes were discovered by subsequent homeowners during renovations, sometimes leading to unexpected windfalls. Immigrant communities, particularly those from countries with unstable currencies, were disproportionately affected by the gold embargo. Many immigrants had trusted gold as a stable store of value and were reluctant to exchange it for paper currency, which they viewed as less secure. In some cases, this led to significant financial losses for families who had relied on gold to preserve their wealth across generations. The economic impact on these communities was profound, as they were forced to navigate a financial system that viewed their most trusted asset as contraband. However, for the majority of Americans, the government's buyback provided much-needed liquidity, allowing people to pay debts and keep their businesses afloat. The gold collected through the executive order was centralized at the Federal Reserve, strengthening the government's control over the money supply. This allowed Roosevelt to devalue the dollar against gold, setting a new exchange rate of $35 per ounce, a measure designed to make U.S. exports more competitive and stimulate economic growth. It marked the beginning of the end for the gold standard, a system that had governed global finance for decades. As other nations followed suit, the world gradually shifted towards a fiat currency system, where money's value was no longer tied to gold, but to government policy and economic performance. Executive Order 6102 was a controversial and bold action. By breaking the link between gold and the dollar, Roosevelt forcefully transferred economic power from the American people to the U.S. government, creating flexibility to manage the economy, while eroding trust and stoking fears of future government overreach. Many of these fears were realized nearly a decade later when President Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066, which authorized the relocation and incarceration of 120,000 Japanese Americans during World War II. While the gold standard is now a relic of history, the debates it sparked remain relevant to this day. The embargo was more than just an economic measure. It was a turning point in the history of American finance. It reshaped the nation's monetary system, reinforced the power of the federal government, and left an indelible mark on the global economy, for better or for worse.